Morning, everyone.
Good morning, Rabbi.
We are in Mishna Shabbos, Perek Gimel, Chapter 3, Mishna Hey, Mishna 5. I dedicate this morning's learning in memory of my mother, Mr. Shalom Rabinowitz, Shalom Espas Rabbi Yaakov Eliezer. Okay, quick introduction. And when it comes to cooking on Shabbos, we have a concept called Kli Rishon, the first vessel, the primary vessel, and Kli Sheni, the second vessel, the secondary vessel. That means the pot that was once on the fire, even if it comes off the fire, it still has the power to cook, as long as the temperature remains what we call yad saledisbay, hot enough that your hand would recoil upon touching it. What exactly that is a machlokes and poskim. How much that is exactly, how many degrees that exactly is. There's different. There's basically a range based on different opinions. So it has to be hot enough. So if you take a Kli Rishon, what is called the primary vessel, off the fire, and it's still hot enough that your hand would recoil, it has the power to cook. And that which comes inside of it, if you, let's say, put something inside of it, it'll get cooked. Now, let's say you take that Kli Rishon, you take from that primary vessel, and you pour it into a bowl, you pour it into a cup, right? So now the cup, the water in the cup is called Kli Sheni, a secondary vessel. And even though it's hot, it does not have the power to cook. So a kettle that comes off the fire is a Kli Rishon, a primary vessel. The cup that the water is poured into is a Kli Sheni, a second vessel, a secondary vessel. You drop something in the kettle, you put something in the kettle, it can cook. You put something into the cup, it can't cook. Therefore, the Mishnah says like this. You have a kettle that was taken off from the fire. See, when something remains on the fire itself is a different ballgame. But we're talking about that's on the fire. But even if it's not going directly, even though the food is going into the kettle, not into the fire, but if it's on the fire, it's on the fire. But here we're talking about the kettle was taken off from the fire, was removed. So it's what we call a Kli Rishon, a first vessel, a primary vessel. You cannot put in cold water so that it gets heated up, meaning you now add cold water into this kettle that came off the fire, and now the cold water that's going to go inside is going to get heated up. That's a problem of bishul. It's a problem of cooking. But you could put into it. Now, what that means is, but you can put a lot of cold water into it, or you can put water into the cup, in order to warm them up. That means like this. In the case of the kettle, we said it's a Kli Rishon, has the power to cook. If you put a little bit of water in, so that little bit of water is going to get cooked. It's not going to change the temperature of the Kli Rishon water, and therefore that water in the Kli Rishon is going to cook that water that went into it. But let's say you poured in so much water, right, into this kettle, that basically the cold water cools down the water inside of it. It lowers the temperature of the water in the Kli Rishon, so that the water is no more yad saledisbay, that the water is not hot enough your hand would recoil, so then you don't have a problem. It didn't cook it. So if you put in enough cold water at one shot, drop's not going to, if you put in a little bit, the little bits that first go in are going to get cooked. But if you put in enough at one time, that basically it lowers the temperature of the water right away, so that the water doesn't remain hot enough to cook the water that went in. So it's going to warm up, right? At the end of the day, everything's going to be warm. But because you poured in so much hot water at one time, it lowered the temperature of the water that it's no more hot enough to cook. So there's no problem then. Or let's say you're talking about where you're adding a little bit of water, but you're not adding a little bit of water to the kettle, you're adding a little bit of water to the cup. That means you took from the Kli Rishon, you poured it into a cup. That's now a Kli Sheni, a secondary vessel. Now you put a little bit of water into the secondary vessel. Then that's okay, because the secondary vessel cannot cook. That's a rule, no matter how hot it is. That's the general rule. Let's put it that way. Okay, now, Mishnah continues. You have an ilfas, they translate as a pan. A kadera is a pot that was removed from the fire, still boiling, meaning it's a hot Kli Rishon. Merusachin doesn't necessarily have to mean boiling. Merusachin just means hot enough that it would cook something, that it has the power to cook something else. It's what we call yad saledisbay, hot enough that the hand would recoil from it. Okay, so you got this you've got this pan, you've got this pot, you took it off the fire. Lo yitein l'seichen tvolin. You cannot add spices into it. Why? Because the spices are raw. And we're talking about raw spices. The spices are raw. You put the raw spices into a kli rishon, it's going to cook it. But you could add the spices into a bowl, or that's a kar is a bowl. That's a bowl you eat from, and a tamchoy is a serving bowl. Okay, both of them are kli sheni. Since both of them are kli sheni, to add the spices to it is not a problem. Now, there doesn't seem to. This is not really much of a chiddush. There's nothing novel here more than what we just said before. Mm-hmm. But the novelty comes from the end of the Mishnah. Rabbi Yehuda says, when we're talking about spices, you can put spices into anything, even to a kli rishon. Rabbi Yehuda holds spices are different, and even a kli rishon doesn't cook them. Unless the food that we're talking about has in it chemetz is vinegar, sear is fish brine. Okay, which is right, except for fish brine. Either. So again, if the food that you're cooking in the kli rishon has fish brine or vinegar in it, then when you put the spices into it, the spices will get cooked. So Yehuda has this opinion that when it comes to spices are different. You can put spices into a kli rishon, nothing's going to happen to it. But once the food that's in the kli rishon has fish brine or vinegar, then the spice will get cooked. And then you can't put the spices into the kli rishon. But if we're talking about other foods, Rabbi Yehuda agrees with the Tana Kama, with the first opinion of the Mishnah, that a kli rishon will cook them. It's only by spices that he argues.
Now, could the
1 second. Okay, sorry.
What I'm hearing is it's quite possible that the temperature within the kli rishon and the kli sheni could be the same.
Yep, that's correct.
Yep.
Nonetheless, that's the rule. Kli shenis don't cook.
Yeah,
has to do with the fact that I think that the walls are cold.
Itself, yeah. They start out
so
cold.
They're starting out in with the container itself is cold,
yeah.
And that already hinders its ability to cook.
Right.
Have a wonderful day and a wonderful Shabbos.
Thank you. Have a good Shabbos. Thank you, Rabbi.
You're welcome.